Hello, music fans. I'm here to count down my top 13 favorite alternative metal bands. Sorry, not bands, my favorite alternative metal albums that I think a Prog fan would like. So I'm typically a listener of progressive metal, progressive rock, but I enjoy a bunch of alternative metal as well. And I wanted to share some of that in case other prog metal or prog rock fans might enjoy some of these as well, but just are not that well versed in the world of alternative metal. So I'm going to start off with some three examples that are from this year, because I listened to a lot of albums this year. And I'll jump right in with my number 13, which is actually an EP, and it's called Elasticity by Serj Tankian. And Serj Tankian was the front man of System of a Down, or he still is, but System of a Down haven't made any new music since 2005. They do still tour and play concerts, but he also makes solo albums, and this is his latest. Actually, he released a bunch of albums in 2021, but this is the one that's kind of alternative metal. Some of the other ones are more classical. He does some film score stuff. So if you're interested in kind of listening to something that's about as close to System of a Down as you could get without it being a real System of a Down album, I think this is pretty close because these songs were written for System of a Down, but they just couldn't agree on making an album together. So Serj Tankian does this project, and Darren does Scars on Broadway, which is probably the other thing that's the closest to what System of a Down would sound like if they were still making music. I prefer Serj's vocals, so I put Serj's EP on here rather than anything by Scars on Broadway, but both are pretty decent and worth checking out, especially if you're a System of a Down fan. My number 12, also from this year, is by a band called Tomahawk, and the album's called Tonic Immobility. And this is a super group. It features Mike Patton on vocals and Trevor Dunn on bass, and they are both in the great band Mr. Bungle, which I love a lot as well. I'm not sure what band the other guys are from in this band, but it is noted as being a super group. And I really enjoyed this album. It's kind of quirky and silly, like some of the things that Mike Patton does, like Mr. Bungle. It's not as crazy as Mr. Bungle, but it's still pretty crazy. So I think prog fans would like this, even though it's not. I wouldn't call it prog or prog metal or prog rock. It's more alternative metal, but it's got a very experimental and kind of silly and quirky edge to it that I think prog fans would appreciate. And then my number 11 will be another one from this year by the band Light the Torch. And the album's called You Will Be the Death of Me. And this is another super group. It's got a bit of a metalcore vibe to it. However, it's not that hardcore. I don't know if it's enough to qualify it as metalcore, but yeah, maybe this should have been on the metalcore list. I have it in alternative metal because it's a little softer, a little more radio friendly. It's got Howard Jones on lead vocals. He's former Killswitch Engage vocalist, and it's got. I see they have Alex Rudinger on drums, and pretty much anything that he drums on turns to gold. He's a great drummer. This one's a little bit poppier and more accessible than I think almost anything else on this list. But if you want really catchy, powerful vocals, just good, well executed songs, good drums, this is for you. And it's a little bit metalcore, but a little bit alternative metal. My next up, so getting out of this year and going back in time to 1991, the album Sailing the Seas of Cheese, and the band is Primus. And this has their legendary song Jerry Was a Race Car Driver with really crazy bass line and just dissonant guitar the whole time. Has Tommy the Cat. Lots of cool songs on here. This is also really quirky, really weird, experimental. It's like funky. It's kind of funk metal, alternative metal. It's, Primus has some influences from prog rock and things like King Crimson. So, and like Rush with the crazy bass lines on here. You can tell Les Claypool's a fan of Geddy Lee. So I do think prog fans could enjoy Sailing the Seas of Cheese by Primus. It's very strange. The vocals are delivered in it's almost like spoken word rather than singing sometimes. But it's unique and interesting. Number 9 is another theme on this list is I've got some bands that became prog metal later, but these are their earlier albums that are more alternative metal. So here's an example of that. The album's called Night is the New Day by Catatonia from 2009. Catatonia went on to later become more a progressive metal or progressive rock band with their albums like their latest one, City Burials, I would actually say is prog, but this one is kind of before they went prog, and it's more of an alternative metal with a lot of doom influence and some gothic vibes. It's very doomy, sad, somber. So if you're interested in that kind of alternative metal, check that out. Number 8, I've got something from the band In Flames. They started off as being pioneers and giants of the melodic death metal genre, but their later stuff has kind of moved towards alternative metal, and this is one of those. It's Siren Charms from 2014. I don't think a lot of people like this album, but I kind of like it, and I think they do some cool stuff like time signature changes on here and playing with some odd times. There's a lot of really catchy melodic stuff, melodic vocals here, some cool riffs. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority by actually enjoying this. I like a lot of In Flames albums. I like both their eras. I like their melodic death metal and their alternative metal. So I have no problem with this. I know a lot of people wish they would go back to their old sound. I kind of do too. Like I think it'd be cool to hear what they could do now with their modern production values and skills and going back to that old sound. But I'm happy if they're making the music that they're happy to be making, and I think that's what they're doing. So if they're more into making this kind of stuff, that's fine with me. It's still catchy, it's still interesting. I'll still keep listening to it. So Siren Charms, that's my number 8. My number 7 is by the band A Perfect Circle, and it's from 2003, and the album's called 13th Step. And this is another, I think this is a super group as well. It's got Maynard James Keenan on vocals. He's from Tool, of course. And Josh Freese on drums. He's a well-known session drummer. And various other members. Yeah, Weak and Powerless is a good song. The Nurse Who Loved Me is a pretty cool cover. I didn't know it was a cover when I first heard it. I just thought it was a cool song, but I guess it's a cover of the band called Failure. Lots of cool songs on here. If you're a fan of Tool, I recommend checking out Perfect Circle's album 13th Step. Getting into the top 6 here. Number 6 is by the band Deftones, and the album's called White Pony. So I recommend this one. This is like alternative metal. It's very artsy, experimental, kind of new metal vibes. One of my favorite songs on here would be Change in the House of Flies, as well as Passenger, which features Maynard James Keenan of Tool, who of course is an excellent vocalist. Chino Marino in this band is also an excellent vocalist. He's very unique. He sings notes that most people wouldn't sing over various chords, which I find interesting. They have this beautiful dissonance to them, and it leads to some creative melodies Yeah, it almost sounds like kind of like soulful uh, chords being made between his voice and the instruments behind it. So that's cool if you want to hear some unique vocals, cool cool riffs, lots of good stuff in here. My number 5, now I've got a prop for this one, is by the band Treo, and it's called Lead Sails and a Paper Anchor. This is another one that was, this band was mostly on the metalcore side until this album. This was kind of a turning point for them. And I like their old metalcore stuff the best, like The Curse and what's that other one called? The Death Grip one, Yesterday. But this is kind of my third favorite from them, Lead Sails and a Paper Anchor, because I think they were still being really honest with this direction change, and they're still being innovative and writing cool stuff. Like, well, they end the album with a ballad, Lead Sails and a Paper Anchor, which is beautiful and catchy. But then they have awesome guitar shredding on here too. And what are the songs that have the cool guitar solos? When Two Are One, or is it Lose It? They have good guitar riffs and songs like Become the Bull, Doomsday. Yeah, really, really good album. And yeah, Wikipedia says this is more alternative metal. I tend to agree. It's not as metalcore. There are some metalcore songs on here, but then there's some songs that are more just like hard rock or radio rock, and then some more alternative metal. They kind of diversified their sound a lot on here, and I like it. But then after this, well, I don't really like their album from this year, from 2021, as much. It's not like it's terrible or anything. It just kind of lost the charm at this point for me. All right, top 4. Number 4, I've got Epic Cloud by the Devin Townsend project. This is from 2012, and yeah, it's a lot of his stuff is progressive metal, but I included this on the list because I don't know if I necessarily count this as progressive metal. It's kind of got a bit of like a musical theater vibe to it, which is kind of cool. He's also kind of silly. A lot of the albums on this list, you'll notice, are kind of like fun and tongue-in-cheek and silly and quirky. So Devin Townsend kind of fits that bill, as well as like Serj Tankian, Tomahawk, Primus. Those are kind of the silly ones on here, and the one that I have up next also kind of meets that description as well. But yeah, very catchy, well-written songs, kind of silly, kind of fun. I think Prog fans would like Epic Cloud by Devin Townsend Project. My number 3 is going to be by the band 12 Foot Ninja, another silly, quirky, alternative metal band that has some avant-garde and funk in there and has some djenty riffs and stuff like that. I thought about putting maybe their album from this year on here, Vengeance. It's really good. But maybe I'll go with Silent Machine, their first album, because it's also really good. Almost all their albums are equally strong and really solid. So this band, everything they do could really be on here, but I'm limiting this list to one album per band. So I'm going to say Silent Machine. Catchy songs like Mother Sky, Silent Machine, the title track of the album. The opening track, Coming For You, hits you really heavy right away, but then goes kind of silly and cheesy later on. So that's kind of fun. And number 2 is Undertow by Tool. And Tool evolved into a progressive metal band, but I think this album's not as progressive. I think on Enema, their album that followed this up, this is their first album, Enema's their second, they became more progressive when they released songs from Enema like Third Eye, and like Stinkfist had some time signature changes and stuff like that. But Undertow is still a little more straightforward, more on the alternative metal side. The good song on here, Sober, it's really catchy, well done vocals, just good atmosphere building with this band. I highly recommend it. And my number 1 alternative metal album for progressive metal and progressive rock fans would be System of a Down, Mesmerize, from 2005. And this is the band that features Serge Tankian on lead vocals, Darren Malakian on guitar and vocals as well. They kind of do co-lead vocals on here, with them trading off within songs, or some songs being more Darren, some being more Serge. When these two work together, I wish they could work together again and make a new album. I would love that so much. When they work together, it's a lot better than when they're working on their own. The material and System of a Down is, I feel, a lot stronger than Serge Tankian's solo stuff and Scars on Broadway and the stuff that Darren does. I think just the pairing of Darren's guitar riffs, really catchy, bouncy riffs, and Serge's vocals just goes really well together, and their harmonies are great. Yeah, everything on here is really solid. My favorite song on here would be Question. That's got some fun time signature change stuff going on. So they do, some people say some of their stuff is almost prog, but it's not quite there. It's more, some of it's more radio friendly, softer songs like Lost in Hollywood, but then they have really heavy songs too, like Cigaro or BYOB. So it's a good mix of stuff on here that I recommend checking out. That's it for my top 13 alternative metal albums that prog fans might enjoy. Hope you found something here to check out. And until next time, peace out.